The funeral parlor smelled like cheap flowers and old carpet. James Ryland stood in his dress uniform, the same one he'd worn to leave the army 12 years ago. The fabric still fit, but it felt foreign now, like wearing someone else's skin. Louise's casket sat closed at the front of the room. White roses covered the lid. Florence had insisted on white roses. She'd insisted on a lot of things. "She looks peaceful," Mrs. Henderson from down the street whispered to her husband. They didn't know the casket was sealed. They didn't know James hadn't seen his daughter's face since that morning 3 days ago when he'd kissed her forehead and told her he'd see her after work. Florence stood beside him in a black dress he'd never seen before. Her eyes were dry. They'd been dry since she'd called him at the shop. "James, you need to come home. Something's happened to Louise." He'd driven the 18 miles from the diesel repair shop in 14 minutes, tires screaming around every curve. The ambulance was already pulling away when he got there. No sirens. No hurry. "Where is she?" he'd asked Florence. "She's gone, James. She took some of her anxiety medication." "Too much." "What anxiety medication?" Florence had looked away. Dr. Kincaid prescribed it last month. For her sleep problems. James didn't remember Louise having sleep problems. He'd tucked her in every night for 10 years. She'd never mentioned being anxious. Now he watched neighbors file past the casket, each one touching Florence's hand, telling her how sorry they were. Florence nodded and thanked them. She looked like a grieving mother should look. She said the right words, but James knew Florence. He'd known her for 14 years, married her for 12. He knew the difference between her real tears and her performance tears. These weren't real. Sheriff Merritt Colson approached them, his hat in his hands. Merritt had gone to high school with Florence. Their families had been close for generations. "Florence, James, I'm real sorry for your loss." Merritt's voice was careful, practiced. "If you need anything at all, thank you, Merritt." Florence's voice cracked just right. "You've been so kind through all this." James watched the exchange. Merritt's eyes never quite met his. They'd known each other for years, had shared beers at the county fair, talked trucks, and hunting seasons. But today Merritt looked at him like he was fragile, like he might break. "The coroner's report should be ready next week," Merritt said quietly. "Just routine paperwork." "We don't need a report," Florence said quickly. "We know what happened. Louise made a mistake with her pills. That's all." Merritt nodded. "Of course. Sometimes these things are just accidents." James felt something cold settle in his chest. The way Merritt said accidents sounded wrong, like he was reading from script. After the service, people gathered at their house. The living room filled with casseroles and sympathy cards. James stood in the kitchen, watching Florence play the perfect widow through the doorway. She hugged Mrs. Patterson. She accepted a covered dish from the Kellys. She told everyone how much their support meant. May, James's sister, found him there. She was still wearing her nurse scrubs under a black cardigan. "I came as soon as I could get coverage at the hospital," she said. "James, I'm so sorry." May's eyes were red. Her grief was real. It cut through the performance in the living room like a blade. "How are you holding up?" she asked. James shrugged. Words felt impossible. Louise was dead. His little girl who drew pictures of horses and asked him to check for monsters under her bed was gone. How was he supposed to hold up? "The funeral was nice," May said. Louise would have liked the flowers. Florence picked everything. May studied his face. She'd always been able to read him better than anyone. Even as kids, she'd known when he was lying about breaking their mother's vase or stealing cookies. "James, can I ask you something?" He nodded. "When did Louise start taking anxiety medication?" "I don't know." Florence said Dr. Kincaid prescribed it last month. May frowned. "That seems sudden. Louise never seemed anxious to me. Last time I saw her, at your birthday dinner, she was happy. Excited about her school project on Montana wildlife." James remembered that dinner. Louise had talked nonstop about grizzly bears and mountain lions. She wanted to be a park ranger when she grew up. She'd seemed fine, normal, happy. "Maybe I didn't notice the signs," he said. May's hand found his shoulder. "Don't do that to yourself. You're a good father. The best." Through the doorway, James watched Florence accept another hug from a neighbor. She looked over their shoulder and caught his eye. She smiled. a small, sad smile that looked perfect from across the room. But James had seen that smile before. He'd seen it when she'd lied about where she'd been on Thursday nights. He'd seen it when she claimed the charges on their credit card were for Louise's school supplies. He'd seen it 2 weeks ago when she'd said she was visiting her sick aunt in Kalispell. Florence was lying about something. James just didn't know what yet. The neighbors started leaving around 8. May stayed to help clean up, loading the dishwasher while Florence organized the sympathy cards. "We should start going through Louise's things tomorrow," Florence said, stacking cards in neat piles. "The sooner we pack everything away, the easier it'll be to heal." James looked up from wiping down the counter. "Pack everything away?" "James, it's not healthy to keep her room like a shrine. We need to move forward. She died 3 days ago, and holding on to her things won't bring her back." Florence's voice was gentle, reasonable. "I've already called the Salvation Army. They can pick up her clothes and toys on Thursday." May stopped loading dishes. "Thursday? Florence, that seems really fast. The grief counselor I spoke with said it's better to make a clean break. Dwelling on the past only makes the pain worse." James felt that cold feeling in his chest again. "What grief counselor?" "Dr. Hartley in Missoula. I called her yesterday." Florence came over and put her hand on his arm. "James, I know this is hard, but we have to think about what's best for both of us." He pulled his arm away. "I'm not ready to pack up her room." Florence's eyes flashed with something that wasn't grief. Irritation, maybe, impatience. But it was gone so fast James almost missed it. "Of course," she said. "We'll wait until you're ready. But not too long, okay? It's not good for either of us to live with reminders." May dried her hands on a dish towel. "I should head home. James, call me if you need anything. Anything at all." After May left, the house felt too quiet. James walked through the rooms, turning off lights Florence had left on. In the living room, he picked up sympathy cards people had signed. "So sorry for your loss. Louise is with the angels now. Our thoughts and prayers are with you." He found Florence in their bedroom, already in her nightgown, brushing her hair at the vanity. "That went well," she said to her reflection. "People were very kind." James sat on the edge of the bed. "Florence, I need to ask you something." "What?" "Why didn't you tell me Louise was having problems?" "Anxiety problems." Florence set down her brush. "I didn't want to worry you. You worked so hard, and Louise didn't want to be a burden. She was 10 years old. She wouldn't have thought about being a burden. You'd be surprised what children think about." Florence turned to face him. "James, she was having nightmares. Bad ones. She was afraid to sleep alone." This was news to James. Louise had never mentioned nightmares. She'd never asked to sleep in their bed or complained about being scared. "When did this start?" "A few weeks ago. Maybe a month. She made me promise not to tell you. She said you had enough to worry about with the shop and the bills." James studied Florence's face. In the vanity mirror's light, she looked sincere, concerned, but something about her story felt rehearsed. "What kind of nightmares?" Florence sighed. "Monsters. Being chased. The usual childhood fears. Dr. Kincaid said the medication would help her sleep better." "I want to talk to Dr. Kincaid." "James, why?" "What's the point now?" "Because I want to understand what happened to my daughter." Florence was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood and came to sit beside him on the bed. She took his hand. "James, I know you're hurting. I'm hurting too. But questioning everything won't bring Louise back. It'll just make this harder." She was right, of course. Louise was gone. Dead. Cremated yesterday, before he'd even been able to see her body. Florence had insisted on cremation. She'd said it's what Louise would have wanted, though James couldn't remember Louise ever expressing an opinion about funeral arrangements. But Florence had seemed so certain, so decisive, and James had been drowning in grief, unable to think clearly about anything. Now, 3 days later, the grief was still there. It sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and sharp. But alongside the grief, other feelings were creeping in. Confusion, suspicion, questions that wouldn't go away. "I'm going to check on Louise's room," he said. Florence's hand tightened on his. "James, maybe you shouldn't." "Not tonight. I need to." Louise's room was exactly as she'd left it. Bed made with the purple comforter she'd picked out last Christmas. Desk covered with colored pencils and half-finished drawings. Bookshelf packed with every children's book James had ever read to her. He sat on her bed and picked up the stuffed horse she'd slept with since she was 3. Mr. Patches. The brown fur was worn smooth from years of hugging. Louise had been in this room 3 nights ago. She'd brushed her teeth, put on her pajamas, kissed him goodnight. 8 hours later, she was dead. James tried to imagine her taking pills from a bottle, swallowing too many by mistake. But Louise was careful about everything. She counted out her vitamins every morning, exactly the way Florence had taught her. She read instructions twice before starting any school project. She wasn't careless that he opened her desk drawer looking for evidence, proof of anxiety Florence claimed she'd been hiding. The drawer held the usual things: erasers, stickers, friendship bracelets, a small diary with a broken lock. James opened the diary. The pages were mostly empty except for a few entries from last summer. Went swimming with Finn today. Saw a moose. Dad taught me how to change a tire. Mom made pancakes for breakfast. Normal, happy entries. No mention of nightmares or anxiety or fear. He flipped through more pages, looking for recent entries. The last one was dated 2 weeks ago. Something weird happened today. Mom told me not to tell Dad about the man who comes over sometimes. She said it would make Dad sad. I don't understand why it would make him sad. The man seems nice. But Mom looked scared when she told me not to tell. James read the entry again. What man? What man came over while he was at work? His phone buzzed. A text from Florence. Coming to bed soon? You've had a long day. James closed the diary and put it back in the drawer. He needed to think, to figure out what Louise meant about a man coming over. But as he stood to leave, something caught his eye. Louise's bookshelf looked different somehow. The books weren't quite aligned the way she usually kept them. Louise was particular about her books, arranging them by size and color in patterns only she understood. He ran his finger along the spines, looking for what was out of place. Near the bottom shelf, he found it. Charlotte's Web was backwards, spine facing in instead of out. James pulled the book from the shelf. It felt wrong in his hands. Too light. He opened the cover and found the pages had been cut out, creating a hollow space inside. In that space was a folded piece of paper. James unfolded it with shaking hands. Louise's careful handwriting filled the page. Daddy, if you're reading this, look under the bed. Please. His heart hammered as he knelt beside Louise's bed. The space underneath was neat and organized, like everything else in her room. Storage boxes pushed against the far wall. Her winter clothes in clear plastic containers. But tucked behind one of the boxes, barely visible, was a Ziploc bag. James pulled it out. Inside were 3 things: a small digital voice recorder, a piece of paper folded in half, and a drawing. The drawing showed 2 stick figures holding hands. One was labeled Mom in Louise's writing. The other was labeled Beau. James stared at the name. Beau. He'd never heard Louise mention anyone named Beau. Florence had never mentioned anyone named Beau either. That he unfolded the paper. Another note in Louise's handwriting. Mommy says I won't remember anything after the medicine, but I always pretend to swallow it. James's hands were shaking as he turned on the voice recorder. Louise's whispered voice filled the quiet room. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this, but I'm scared. Mommy brings Beau when Daddy works late. He scares me. She gave me red pills last night. I threw them up in the bathroom after she left my room. They said, don't tell Daddy or he'll be sorry. I don't know what that means, but I don't want Daddy to be sorry. I love Daddy. If something bad happens to me, it's not Daddy's fault. It's not an accident. The recording ended. James played it again, then again. Louise's voice, small and frightened, telling him things that made his world tilt sideways. Red pills. A man named Beau. Threats about telling Daddy. This wasn't anxiety medication. This wasn't an accident. This was something else entirely. James sat on Louise's floor, holding the recorder, trying to process what he'd heard. Florence had been lying. About the anxiety, about the medication, about everything. Someone named Beau had been coming to their house. Louise had been scared enough to hide evidence under her bed. She'd been given pills she was afraid to take. And now she was dead. James stood up, his military training kicking in. He needed information. He needed to understand exactly what had happened in this house while he was at work. He needed to find out who Beau was and why Florence had lied about everything. But first, he needed to hide this evidence somewhere Florence would never find it. He slipped the Ziploc bag inside his jacket and walked back to the bedroom. Florence was already in bed, reading a magazine. "How are you feeling?" she asked without looking up. "Tired." Did it help? Being in her room? James met her eyes in the mirror. "Yeah, it helped." Florence smiled. "Good. I think tomorrow we should start packing some of her things. Just the clothes she's outgrown. We can donate them to families who need them." "Sure," James said. "That sounds reasonable." But as he brushed his teeth and got ready for bed, James was already planning. Tomorrow he would start asking questions. Real questions. He would find out who Beau was. He would discover what kind of pills Louise had been given. He would learn the truth about what happened to his daughter. And when he did, there would be consequences. Florence turned off her bedside lamp. "Good night, James." "Good night." In the darkness, James listened to Florence's breathing slow and deepen. When he was certain she was asleep, he reached under his pillow and touched the Ziploc bag he'd hidden there. Louise had left him a message. She'd been smart enough and brave enough to leave him clues. Now he had to be smart enough and brave enough to follow them. James woke before dawn, the way he had every day since leaving the army. Florence was still sleeping, one arm thrown across the pillow where he'd been lying. He dressed quietly and slipped out to his truck. The drive to Dr. Kincaid's office took 20 minutes. James parked across the street and waited. At 7:30, a silver Honda pulled into the clinic parking lot. Dr. Paula Kincaid got out, juggling a coffee cup and her medical bag. James had met Dr. Kincaid several times over the years. Louise's annual checkups, a broken wrist from falling off her bike, strep throat last winter. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who talked straight and didn't waste time. He waited until 8 o'clock when the clinic opened, then walked across the street. The receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes, looked up as he entered. "Mr. Ryland? I'm so sorry about Louise. Dr. Kincaid asked me to tell you that if you need anything, I need to talk to her." "About Louise's medication." The receptionist's face shifted slightly. "I'll see if she has a moment." Dr. Kincaid appeared in the doorway to the examination rooms a few minutes later. She looked surprised to see him. "James, how are you holding up? I need to ask you about the anxiety medication you prescribed for Louise." Dr. Kincaid frowned. "What anxiety medication?" The question hit James like a physical blow. "The pills Florence said you gave her. For Louise's sleep problems." "James, I didn't prescribe any anxiety medication for Louise. I haven't seen her since her last checkup in January." James felt the world shift again. "Florence said you prescribed something last month. For nightmares Louise was having." Florence never brought Louise in for nightmares. If she had been having sleep issues, I would have wanted to see her myself before prescribing anything. Dr. Kincaid's voice was careful, professional. "James, what kind of medication are we talking about?" "I don't know. Florence just said anxiety pills." Dr. Kincaid was quiet for a moment. "James, I think you should sit down." She led him to a small consultation room and closed the door. "Tell me exactly what Florence told you about Louise's medication." James repeated everything Florence had said. The nightmares, the anxiety, the prescription for sleep aids. Dr. Kincaid listened without interrupting. "James, none of that is in Louise's file. If Florence believed Louise was having anxiety or sleep problems, the appropriate thing would have been to bring her in for an evaluation. I would never prescribe psychiatric medication for a child without seeing them first." "Then where did the pills come from?" "I don't know, but I think you need to find out." Dr. Kincaid leaned forward. "James, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." James nodded. "Have you considered that Louise's death might not have been an accident?" The words hung in the air between them. James thought about the voice recorder, about Louise's whispered confession about throwing up red pills. "Yes," he said quietly. "I've considered it." Dr. Kincaid nodded. "If you have any evidence that suggests Louise was given medication she wasn't supposed to have, you need to take it to the police." James left the clinic with more questions than answers. Someone had given Louise pills that didn't come from her doctor. Florence had lied about where the medication came from. And Louise had been afraid enough to hide evidence. But before he went to the police, he needed to know more. He needed to understand what he was walking into. His phone rang as he reached his truck. Florence. James. Where are you? I woke up and you were gone. I went for a drive. To clear my head. Are you okay? You sound strange. I'm fine. I'll be home soon. Good. May called. She's coming over this afternoon to help pack Louise's things. I thought we could start with her closet. James closed his eyes. Florence was still pushing to get rid of Louise's belongings. Still trying to erase evidence of their daughter's life. Okay, he said. I'll see you soon. But instead of going home, James drove to the pharmacy where Florence claimed to have filled Louise's prescription. The pharmacist, a thin man named Roger, had known their family for years. James, I'm sorry about Louise. Such a terrible thing. Roger, I need to ask you about the medication Louise was taking. The anxiety pills. Roger looked confused. What anxiety pills? Another dead end. Another lie exposed. My wife said she filled a prescription here last month. For Louise's sleep problems. Roger shook his head. James, I haven't filled any prescriptions for Louise in over 6 months. The last thing was antibiotics for that ear infection she had. James felt his hands clench in a fist. Are you sure? Positive. I know every prescription that goes through this pharmacy. Roger paused. James, is everything okay? Fine. Just trying to get some things straight. But as James walked back to his truck, nothing was straight. Everything Florence had told him about Louise's death was a lie. The medication hadn't come from Dr. Kincaid. It hadn't come from their pharmacy. Where had it come from? And who was Beau? James drove home slowly, his mind working through possibilities. By the time he pulled into his driveway, he had a plan. Florence was in the kitchen, making lunch. She smiled when he walked in, but her eyes were watchful. Feel better after your drive? Yeah, helped clear my head. Good. May will be here in an hour. I thought we could start with Louise's summer clothes. They're too small for her anyway. Louise would never outgrow her summer clothes now. She would never outgrow anything. Florence, I've been thinking about what you said. About Louise's anxiety. Florence went still. What about it? I think I should have noticed the signs. I should have been more aware of what was happening with her. James, you couldn't have known. Louise was good at hiding her feelings. Still, I feel like I failed her somehow. James watched Florence's face carefully. Maybe if I'd been home more. Worked fewer hours. You work hard to provide for us. Louise understood that. But if I'd been here more often, maybe I would have seen what was bothering her. Maybe I would have met this doctor you mentioned. Dr. Hartley. Florence nodded. Dr. Hartley said it's normal for parents to feel guilty. But Louise's problems weren't your fault. What about the medication? Maybe I should call Dr. Kincaid and ask about the dosage. Make sure Louise was taking the right amount. Florence's knife stopped moving across the tomato she was slicing. Why would you do that? Just to put my mind at ease. To know we did everything right. James, calling Dr. Kincaid won't change anything. Louise is gone. I know, but I need to understand what happened. For my own peace of mind. Florence set down the knife and turned to face him. James, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you won't torture yourself with questions that don't have answers. Promise me you'll try to move forward. James met her eyes. I promise I'll try. But he was already planning his next move. Florence's filing cabinet was in the spare bedroom she used as an office. She kept it locked, but James had learned a few things about locks during his Army years that an hour later. May arrived with empty boxes and packing tape. She hugged James at the door. How are you doing? Taking it one day at a time. May studied his face. You look like you haven't been sleeping. Hard to sleep without her in the house. Florence appeared beside them. May, thank you for coming. I think it'll be easier to pack things up with extra hands. They started in Louise's closet. Florence pulled out dresses and shirts, holding each one up briefly before folding it into a donation box. May worked more slowly, examining each piece of clothing like it held memories. She loved this sweater, May said, holding up a purple cardigan. She wore it to my birthday dinner last month. It's too small for her now, Florence said. No point keeping things she can't use. James watched the process, feeling like he was watching his daughter disappear one piece of clothing at a time. But he forced himself to stay quiet, to play along with Florence's rush to erase Louise's presence, After 2 hours, they'd filled 4 boxes with clothes. May wiped her eyes with a tissue. "This is harder than I thought it would be." "It's supposed to be hard," Florence said. "But it's necessary. We can't heal if we're surrounded by reminders." May looked at James. "What do you think? Are you ready to let go of her things?" James thought about the voice recorder hidden in his bedroom, about Louise's whispered warnings, about the lies Florence had told. "I think Louise would want her things to help other children," he said carefully. Florence smiled. "Exactly. She was always generous." After May left, Florence went to take a shower. James waited until he heard the water running, then slipped into the spare bedroom. Florence's filing cabinet sat in the corner, a black metal box with 3 drawers. The lock was simple. James had it open in under 2 minutes. The top drawer held household documents, insurance papers, utility bills, warranties for appliances. James flipped through them quickly, looking for anything unusual. The second drawer contained Florence's personal papers: birth certificate, college transcripts, old tax returns. Nothing helpful. The bottom drawer was locked separately. James worked on this lock more carefully, knowing it probably contained whatever Florence was most eager to hide. Inside, he found a manila folder labeled Louise Insurance. James opened it and felt his blood turn cold. A life insurance policy. Dated 5 weeks ago. Louise Ryland, beneficiary amount $250,000. James had never signed this policy. He'd never even heard of this insurance company. But there was his signature at the bottom, right next to Florence's. His hands shook as he photographed each page with his phone. The policy was detailed, specific. It covered accidental death, including drug overdose. The beneficiaries were listed as James and Florence Ryland, but Florence had signed as the primary contact. Beneath the insurance policy was a second folder. This one contained printed emails between Florence and someone named B_Maddox 47. James read the first email. Everything is set for next week. J works late Tuesdays. Make sure L takes the full dose this time. No more games. Florence's response. She keeps spitting them out. Maybe we should try a different approach. No changes now. We come too far. Stick to the plan. After this, we're free. James read through more emails, his horror growing with each exchange. Florence and this B_Maddox person had been planning something involving Louise for weeks. They'd been giving her pills she didn't want to take. They'd been waiting for James to work late. The final email was dated the day Louise died. It's done. Jay's at work until 6. Make the call at 4:30. Remember, she was acting strange this morning. You're worried about her. The pills were for anxiety. You found her when you got home from errands, Florence had replied. What about after? When do we leave? Soon. Let him grieve for a few weeks. Then we'll tell him you need space. You can stay at your sister's. He'll understand. And Louise? What about her? The cremation. Are you sure no one will ask questions? Merritt owes me a favor. He won't look too hard at the paperwork. Trust me. James read the email chain 3 times, photographing each page. Florence hadn't just lied about Louise's medication. She planned his daughter's death with someone named B_Maddox, and Sheriff Merritt was involved. Louise hadn't died from an accidental overdose. She'd been murdered. The shower was still running. James quickly searched the rest of the drawer. At the bottom, he found a burner phone. He turned it on and scrolled through the text messages. Most were between Florence and B_Maddox. The messages were brief, coded, but clear enough in context. Tuesday night worked perfectly. Jay was at the shop until almost 7. L is getting suspicious. Yesterday, she asked why you come over when Daddy's not home. Tell her I'm a friend helping with house repairs. Kids believe anything. She's smart, B. Smarter than we thought. Yesterday, I caught her looking at us through the window. Don't worry. After tomorrow, it won't matter what she saw. James felt sick reading the messages. Louise had known something was wrong. She'd been watching, trying to understand what was happening in her own home. The final text message was sent an hour after Louise died. It's done. Jay is destroyed. Give me 2 weeks, then we'll make our move. James turned off the phone and put everything back exactly as he'd found it. He locked the filing cabinet and returned to the living room just as the shower stopped running. A few minutes later, Florence appeared in a bathrobe, her hair wrapped in a towel. "Feel better?" he asked. "Much." All that packing was dusty work. She sat beside him on the couch. "James, I'm proud of you. I know today was hard, but you're handling everything so well." James looked at his wife. Her face was open, concerned, loving. She looked like the woman he'd married, the woman who'd held his hand during his father's funeral, the woman who'd cried with joy when Louise took her first steps. But she wasn't that woman. Maybe she never had been. "Florence, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you know anyone named Beau?" Florence went very still. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and James saw something cold and calculated in her eyes. "Beau? No, I don't think so. Why?" "Louise mentioned someone named Beau in her diary. I was wondering if maybe it was a friend from school." "Oh." Florence relaxed slightly. Maybe it was a boy she had a crush on? You know how 10-year-olds get. James nodded. "Probably. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything important." Florence leaned over and kissed his cheek. "You're a good father, James. Louise knew how much you loved her." Past tense. Louise knew. As if Florence had already moved on, already accepted that Louise was gone forever. But James was just getting started. That night, after Florence fell asleep, James drove to May's house. She lived in a small apartment near the hospital, close enough to walk to work when the weather was good. "James, what are you doing here? It's almost midnight. I need your help with something. Can I come in?" May's apartment was neat and practical, like May herself. Medical textbooks on the shelves, a pile of scrubs on the chair, the smell of coffee and antiseptic. "What's going on?" May asked, settling on her couch. James pulled out his phone and showed her the photos he'd taken of the insurance policy and email exchanges. May read in silence, her face growing paler with each page. "James, this is evidence of murder. I know. You have to take this to the police. Tonight." James shook his head. "Not yet. Sheriff Merritt is involved somehow. Florence mentioned him in one of the emails. I need to understand how deep this goes before I make a move." May set down the phone. "James, listen to me. If Florence killed Louise, if she's planning to leave you, then you're in danger too. She's already proven she'll kill to get what she wants. She won't hurt me. She needs me alive to collect the insurance money. For now. But what happens when the money comes through? What happens when she doesn't need you anymore?" James had thought about this. Florence's plan seemed to involve waiting a few weeks, then leaving him under the pretense of needing space to grieve. She'd take the insurance money and disappear with B. Maddox, but James wasn't going to let that happen. "May, I need you to do something for me." "What?" "I need you to request Louise's autopsy report. As her next of kin, you should be able to get a copy." May nodded. "I can do that." "But James, what if the report shows exactly what Florence claimed? What if it really does look like an accidental overdose? Then I'll know they were smart enough to cover their tracks. But maybe they made a mistake. Maybe there's something in the report that doesn't add up." May was quiet for a moment. "There's something else I need to tell you." "What?" "When I was packing Louise's clothes today, I noticed something. Florence was being very specific about which clothes to donate and which to throw away. She wanted to throw away anything Louise had worn recently." James thought about this. Why would that matter? If Louise had been struggling with someone, if there had been a fight, there might be physical evidence on her clothes. DNA, fibers, bruising patterns that don't match an accidental overdose. But the clothes are gone now. No, they're not. When Florence went to get more boxes from the garage, I moved 2 bags to my car. I told her I want to check them for anything Louise might have wanted donated to specific places. James felt a surge of hope. "May, you might have just saved this case." "I hope so. But James, promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll be careful. If Florence killed Louise, if she's planning to disappear with this Beau person, then she's dangerous. Don't confront her until we have enough evidence to put her away forever." James thought about Louise's voice on the recording, small and scared but brave enough to leave him clues. He thought about Florence's performance at the funeral, her rush to pack away Louise's belongings, her lies about the medication. "I won't confront her," he said, "but I'm not done investigating." May walked him to the door. "What's your next step?" "I need to find out who B. Maddox is, and I need to understand how Sheriff Merritt fits into this." Be careful, James. Please. James drove home through empty streets, his mind already working on the next phase of his investigation. Florence thought she was smart. She thought she'd planned the perfect crime, but she'd underestimated Louise. And she'd definitely underestimated him. The house was dark when he pulled into the driveway. Florence's car was in its usual spot. The porch light was on, the way it always was when she was waiting for him to come home. But as James walked toward the front door, he noticed something that made him stop. Florence's bedroom window was dark, but there was a faint glow coming from the spare bedroom, the office where she kept her filing cabinet. James moved quietly around the side of the house and peered through the window. Florence was sitting at her computer, typing. Even from outside, he could see she was composing an email. James pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. He couldn't see the computer screen clearly, but he could see Florence's profile, lit by the monitor's glow. She looked focused and tense, not like a grieving mother who should be sleeping. She finished typing and closed the laptop. James quickly moved away from the window and entered the house through the front door, making enough noise to announce his arrival. Florence? I'm home. In here, she called from the bedroom. James found her in bed, reading a magazine. The same magazine she'd been reading when he'd come home earlier. Where did you go so late? She asked. For a drive. Couldn't sleep. Florence nodded sympathetically. Grief affects everyone differently. Some people sleep too much, others can't sleep at all. James got ready for bed, watching Florence in the bathroom mirror as he brushed his teeth. She looked relaxed, normal. But he'd seen her in the office, working on something she didn't want him to know about. As he slipped into bed beside her, Florence reached over and touched his arm. James, I've been thinking about what we discussed earlier. About moving forward. What about it? I think it might be good for both of us to get away for a while. Take a trip somewhere. Change of scenery might help with the healing process. James kept his voice neutral. What were you thinking? Maybe visit my sister in Portland. Or we could go somewhere we've never been. Start fresh. Start fresh. Just like the emails had suggested. Florence was already laying the groundwork for her exit strategy. That sounds nice, James said. But I'm not ready to leave yet. Too many things to take care of here. Florence was quiet for a moment. What kind of things? Louise's affairs. Making sure all her medical bills are paid. Settling things with the school. I can handle all of that. I know, but I need to do some of it myself. For closure. Florence rolled over to face him. James, I'm worried about you. You seem different since the funeral. Different how? Distant. Like you're thinking about things you're not telling me. James met her eyes in the darkness. I'm grieving, Florence. I lost my daughter. That changes a person. Of course. I just want to make sure you're okay. I'm okay. Just need time to process everything. Florence nodded and settled back into her pillow. We both do. But as James lay beside her, listening to her breathing slow and deepen, he was already planning his next move. Tomorrow he would find out who Maddox was. He would track down the source of the pills that killed Louise. He would build a case that would put Florence in prison for the rest of her life. Louise had been smart enough to leave him clues. Now, he had to be smart enough to follow them to the end. James waited until Florence left for her supposed appointment with Dr. Hartley before making his next move. He checked online. There was no Dr. Hartley practicing grief counseling in Missoula. Another lie to add to Florence's growing collection, he drove to the library and used their computers to search for Maddox. The name pulled up several matches in Montana, but only one in their area. Bo Maddox, 39, owner of Iron Body Gym on the outskirts of town. James had driven past the gym countless times but never been inside. It was in a converted warehouse, the kind of place that attracted serious weightlifters and people who preferred to work out without mirrors and juice bars. The gym's website showed Bo Maddox in the About section. Tall, muscular, with dark hair and cold eyes. The bio mentioned he was a former competitive bodybuilder who'd opened the gym 3 years ago to help people achieve their fitness goals. James dug deeper, searching public records. Bo Maddox had been arrested twice in his 20s, once for assault and once for prescription drug fraud. Both cases had been dismissed or pleaded down to lesser charges, prescription drug fraud. That explained where Louise's pills had come from. James printed out everything he could find about Bo Maddox, then drove to the gym. It was 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday, and the parking lot was nearly empty. Perfect. Inside, the gym was exactly what James had expected. Heavy weights, punching bags, the smell of sweat and metal. A few men worked out in the back, but the front desk was empty. "Help you with something?" James turned to find Bo Maddox walking toward him. In person, he was even more intimidating than his photos suggested. 6'2", probably 220, with the kind of muscle that came from years of serious training. "I'm thinking about joining," James said. James Ryland. Bo's eyes flickered with recognition, but his expression didn't change. "Bo Maddox. I own the place." They shook hands. Bo's grip was strong, meant to intimidate. James matched it, letting his own military training show through. "Sorry about your loss," Bo said. "Heard about your daughter. Terrible thing. Thank you." Bo led him on a tour of the facility, pointing out equipment and explaining membership rates. He seemed relaxed, professional. If James hadn't known better, he'd have thought Bo was exactly what he appeared to be, a gym owner trying to make a sale. "What kind of training you looking to do?" Bo asked. "General fitness. Haven't been taking care of myself since Louise died. Grief affects people differently. Some folks eat too much, some don't eat at all. Exercise can help with both." They were standing near the back of the gym now, away from the other members. James decided to push a little. "My wife's been encouraging me to get out more. Florence. She thinks I'm spending too much time dwelling on what happened." Bo nodded. "Smart woman. Florence, you said." "Yeah, Florence Ryland. You might know her. She's been getting around town more lately. Meeting with counselors, handling Louise's affairs. Don't think I know her, but it's good she's staying active. Helps with the healing process." Bo was lying smoothly, professionally. But James caught the slight tension in his shoulders when Florence's name was mentioned. "Well, I should let you get back to your workout," Bo said. "Think about the membership. First month is half price for new members." James shook his hand again. "I'll definitely consider it." As he walked to his truck, James felt Bo watching him through the gym's windows. The man was worried about something. Good. James's next stop was the county records office. If Florence and Bo were planning to disappear together, they might have made arrangements, property purchases, vehicle registrations, anything that would help them start over somewhere else. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with wire-rimmed glasses, was helpful but thorough. James claimed to be researching property purchases for an investment opportunity. After an hour of searching, she found what James was looking for. 3 weeks ago, a property had been purchased in Flathead County, about 60 miles north. The buyer was listed as B. Maddox Enterprises, but the contact address was a P.O. box James didn't recognize. "Can you tell me anything else about this property?" James asked. The clerk pulled up additional records. "It's a small cabin on 15 acres. Pretty remote. Seller said it needed work, but it has a well and septic system." A remote cabin. The perfect place to hide someone until the heat died down. Or the perfect place to dispose of evidence. James thanked the clerk and drove home, his mind working through possibilities. Florence and Bo had purchased a hideout. They'd planned Louise's death carefully, involving Sheriff Merritt to smooth over any awkward questions. They'd taken out a large life insurance policy on Louise, but something didn't add up. If they killed Louise for the insurance money, why did they need a remote cabin? The plan seemed to be for Florence to leave James after a few weeks, claiming she needed space to grieve. She'd take her share of the insurance money and start over with Bo somewhere else. Unless they weren't planning to just take the money and run. Unless there was more to their plan than James had figured out, that he needed help. Real help from someone who understood criminal investigations better than he did. May was working a double shift at the hospital, but she agreed to meet him during her dinner break. They sat in her car in the hospital parking lot, sharing coffee from the vending machine. "I got Louise's autopsy report," May said, handing him a manila envelope. James opened it with shaking hands. The official language was dense, medical, but the conclusion was clear. Louise had died from respiratory failure caused by an overdose of benzodiazepine, a powerful sedative. "This doesn't make sense," James said, reading through the report again. "What do you mean?" "Look at the dosage they found in her system. According to this, Louise took enough medication to kill an adult." May studied the report. "You're right. A child Louise's size would have been unconscious after a quarter of this amount. So either Louise somehow took 4 times the lethal dose by accident, or someone forced her to take it. May finished the thought. James, this proves Louise was murdered. James thought about Louise's voice on the recorder, talking about throwing up red pills. What if she didn't actually take all of this medication? What do you mean? What if someone injected her with it? Or gave it to her intravenously? That would explain the massive dose in her system. May was quiet for a moment, thinking through the medical implications. If someone had injected Louise with this much benzodiazepine, there would be injection marks. Did the autopsy mention any? James scanned the report again. No injection marks noted. But look at this, it says the body was in advanced decomposition when examined. How is that possible? Louise died 4 days ago. James felt cold understanding wash over him. May, what if Louise didn't die 4 days ago? What are you saying? What if she died weeks ago? What if Florence has been lying about when Louise died, not just how she died? May stared at him. James, that would mean the cremation was fake. That Florence has been putting on an act this whole time, pretending Louise just died. James pulled out his phone and called the crematorium Florence had claimed to use. After being transferred twice, he reached someone who could check their records. No, the woman said after a few minutes. We don't have any record of a Louise Ryland. Are you sure you have a right facility? James hung up and looked at May. No cremation. No body. May, what if Louise is still alive? May's face went white. James, if Louise is alive, if Florence has been holding her somewhere, the cabin. Bo bought a cabin in Flathead County 3 weeks ago. May grabbed his arm. We have to call the police. Right now. James thought about Sheriff Merritt, about the email suggesting he was involved in covering up Louise's supposed death. Not the local police. We need to call the state police. Or the FBI. But even as he said it, James knew they didn't have enough evidence yet. They had suspicious emails, a fake insurance policy, and a cremation that never happened. But they didn't have proof that Louise was alive or that Florence had kidnapped her. May, I need you to do something for me. What? I need you to call in sick tomorrow. Tell them you have the flu, something contagious that'll keep you home for a few days. What? Because I'm going to find that cabin. And when I do, I'm going to need backup I can trust. May shook her head. James, this is too dangerous. If Florence and Bo are holding Louise at this cabin, if they're willing to kill her for insurance money, then they'll kill you too. Maybe, but I'm not leaving my daughter with them for another day. James drove home to find Florence cooking dinner. She smiled when he walked in, the same loving smile she'd given him for 12 years of marriage. How was your day? She asked. Quiet. Spent some time thinking. About Louise, about a lot of things. Florence nodded sympathetically. Dr. Hartley says it's normal to feel confused after losing a child. The mind tries to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. What did Dr. Hartley say about the medication Louise was taking? Florence went still. What about it? I was wondering if maybe Louise had built up a tolerance. If maybe the normal dose wasn't working anymore. Why would you think that? James watched Florence's face carefully. The coroner said she had a lot of medication in her system, more than a normal dose. James, I don't want to talk about the technical details. It's too painful. I understand. But I keep thinking about that night, about whether there was something I could have done differently. Florence came over and put her arms around him. James, there was nothing you could have done. Louise made a mistake with her pills. It's not your fault, and it's not mine. But as Florence held him, James was thinking about the cabin in Flathead County, about Louise's voice on the recorder, about the cremation that never happened. Tomorrow, he would find out if his daughter was still alive. That night, James lay awake until he was certain Florence was asleep. Then he slipped out of bed and got dressed in dark clothes. He took his hunting rifle from the gun safe and loaded it. If Louise was at that cabin, if Florence and Bo were holding her there, James was going to end this tonight. He left Florence a note on the kitchen table, gone to settle some things. Don't wait up. The drive to Flathead County took an hour and a half through winding mountain roads. James had printed out directions to the property Bo had purchased, but finding it in the darkness was harder than he'd expected. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by thick pine trees. James parked a quarter mile away and approached on foot, using skills he'd learned in the Army 20 years ago. The cabin was small, maybe 2 bedrooms, with a rusted metal roof and peeling paint. A light was on in the front window. Beau's truck was parked beside the building. James circled the cabin, looking for other vehicles, other people, other ways in and out. The back of the building had a small window that was partially open. Through that window, James could hear voices, male and female, talking quietly as he crept closer until he could make out words. "Told you she was getting suspicious," Beau was saying. "She's 10 years old. How suspicious could she be?" Florence's voice. Suspicious enough to hide a fucking recorder under her bed. James's heart hammered. They were talking about Louise in present tense. She was alive. "We should have moved her weeks ago," Florence said. "And go where?" "This was your plan, Florence. Fake her death, collect the insurance money, disappear. But you wanted to stay close, keep playing the grieving mother. It's worked so far." James suspects nothing. James is asking questions about medication, about doctors. How long before he figures out Louise never died? James worked his way around to the front window and peered inside. The main room of the cabin was furnished with cheap furniture and camping gear. Florence sat on a couch, still wearing the same clothes she'd had on at dinner. Beau stood near a window, looking agitated. "Where is she?" Florence asked. "Sleeping. Finally. I had to give her another dose." "How much longer are we going to keep this up?" Beau shrugged. "Until we don't need to anymore." The meaning was clear. They were going to kill Louise once they had the insurance money. They'd been keeping her alive only in case they needed to produce a body later. James had heard enough. He moved to the back of the cabin and found a partially open window. It led into a small bedroom. In the dim light from the main room, he could see a small figure on the bed. Louise. She was unconscious, breathing shallowly. Her face was thinner than James remembered, and there were dark circles under her eyes. But she was alive. James worked the window open wider and climbed inside. Louise didn't stir when he touched her shoulder. Whatever they'd given her, it was keeping her heavily sedated. He picked her up carefully, noting how light she felt. They hadn't been feeding her properly. The voices in the next room were getting louder. Florence and Beau were arguing about something. James had minutes, maybe less, before they checked on Louise. He carried her to the window and managed to get her outside without waking her. But as he was climbing out himself, his boot caught on the window frame. The sound was small, but in the quiet cabin, it might as well have been a gunshot. "What was that?" Florence's voice, sharp with alarm. James grabbed Louise and ran for the trees. Behind him, he heard footsteps, voices, the cabin door slamming open. "She's gone," Beau shouted. "Someone took her." A flashlight beam swept across the trees where James was hiding. He held Louise tight against his chest, feeling her small heart beating against his ribs. "Find her!" Florence screamed. "Find her now!" James had a choice. He could try to make it back to his truck with Louise, but it was a quarter mile through thick woods in the dark. Or he could find a place to hide Louise and deal with Florence and Beau himself. He chose the second option. James found a hollow under a fallen tree about 50 yards from the cabin. He placed Louise inside, covering her with his jacket. "Louise," he whispered. "Louise, wake up." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Daddy." "Yes, baby. It's me. I need you to stay here and be very quiet. Can you do that for me?" Louise nodded weakly. "I knew you'd come. I left you clues. You did perfect, sweetheart. Stay hidden until I come back for you." James kissed her forehead and headed back toward the cabin. Florence and Beau were searching the woods with flashlights, calling to each other as they moved through the trees. James circled around them and entered the cabin through the front door. On the kitchen table, he found what he was looking for: Florence's purse with her cell phone inside. He scrolled through her recent calls until he found Sheriff Merritt's number. Then he called May. "May, it's James. I found Louise. She's alive. Thank God. Where are you?" James gave her the address of the cabin. "Call the state police. Tell them we have a kidnapping situation and that the local sheriff is involved. Tell them to send everything they have." "James, where are Florence and Beau?" "Looking for Louise in the woods. I'm going to keep them busy until help arrives." James hung up and walked back outside. The flashlight beams were moving away from the cabin, deeper into the forest. "Florence," he called. The flashlights stopped moving. "Florence, I know you can hear me." After a moment, Florence's voice came back through the darkness. "James? James, is that you?" "Yeah, it's me." Florence appeared at the edge of the tree line, her flashlight pointed at the ground. She looked genuinely surprised to see him. "James, what are you doing here? How did you find this place?" "I followed the clues Louise left me. The voice recorder, the drawing of you and Beau, the emails about your plan to kill our daughter." Florence's mask finally slipped completely. The loving wife, the grieving mother, the concerned partner, all of it fell away, leaving something cold and calculating. "You don't understand," she said. "I understand perfectly. You wanted the insurance money. You wanted to start over with Beau. And Louise was in your way." Beau emerged from the trees behind Florence, and James saw he was carrying a gun. "Where is she?" Beau demanded. "Safe." "James, this doesn't have to be difficult," Florence said. "We can work something out." "What kind of work?" "We'll split the insurance money. 3 ways. You can disappear, start over somewhere else. We'll tell people you couldn't handle the grief, that you left town to heal." James looked at his wife, the woman he'd shared a bed with, raised a child with, built a life with. "You killed our daughter for money. Louise isn't dead. You were going to kill her. After you got the insurance money, you were going to kill her for real." Florence was quiet for a moment. Then she shrugged. She would have figured things out eventually. Children talk. It was cleaner this way. Cleaner. Florence was talking about murdering their 10-year-old daughter like it was a business decision. "James, last chance," Beau said, raising his gun. "Tell us where Louise is, and we'll let you walk away." James thought about Louise hiding under the fallen tree, weak and scared but alive. He thought about the voice recorder, about her whispered message that had started him on this path. "No," he said. Beau's finger moved toward the trigger. But before he could fire, James heard the most beautiful sound in the world's sirens. Lots of them, getting closer. "Shit," Beau muttered. Florence looked panicked for the first time. "We have to go. Now." "What about him?" Beau pointed his gun at James. "Leave him. We'll say he wasn't on it, that he helped plan the whole thing." But the sirens were too close now. Car doors were slamming, voices shouting orders. Flashlights swept through the trees, professional flashlights, not the cheap ones Florence and Beau had been using. "This is the Montana State Police." Everyone on the ground, hands visible. Beau dropped his gun and raised his hands. Florence did the same. James knelt slowly, his hands in the air. Within minutes, the area around the cabin was swarming with law enforcement. State police, county sheriffs from Flathead County, even FBI agents in bulletproof vests. That a detective approached James. "Are you James Ryland?" "Yes." "Where's your daughter?" James led them to the fallen tree where he'd hidden Louise. She was awake now, sitting up and looking around with wide eyes. "Daddy." James knelt beside her and pulled her into his arms. She felt so small, so fragile, but she was alive. She was real. "I'm here, baby. You're safe now." As the paramedics checked Louise over, James watched Florence and Beau being loaded into separate police cars. Florence looked back at him once, her face blank and emotionless. She didn't look sorry. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed that her plan hadn't worked. The detective came back over. "Mr. Ryland, we're going to need a full statement. But first, is there anything else we should know about this situation?" James thought about the insurance policy, the fake emails, Sheriff Merritt's involvement in covering up Louise's supposed death. "Yeah," he said, "there's a lot more." 6 months later, James sat in a Missoula courtroom as the jury foreman read the verdict. In the case of the state of Montana versus Florence Ryland, on the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Florence showed no emotion as the verdicts continued. Kidnapping, insurance fraud, conspiracy, child endangerment. The charges kept coming, each one carrying years in prison. Beau had taken a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Florence in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony had filled in the details of their plan, how they'd met at his gym, how they'd planned Louise's fake death, how they'd intended to collect the insurance money and disappear. Sheriff Merritt had been arrested separately, charged with conspiracy and obstruction of justice. His deal with Beau to smooth over any questions about Louise's death had unraveled quickly once the state police took over the investigation. When it was time for sentencing, the judge looked down at Florence with disgust. "Mrs. Ryland, you planned and attempted to murder a 10-year-old child, your own daughter, for financial gain. You held her captive for weeks, keeping her sedated and isolated from everyone who loved her. You put her father through the agony of believing she was dead." The judge paused, letting the weight of Florence's crimes settle over the courtroom. "I sentence you to 35 years in prison without the possibility of parole." Florence was led away in handcuffs. She didn't look back at James. She didn't ask about Louise. She simply walked out of the courtroom like she was leaving a business meeting that hadn't gone her way. Afterward, James and Louise stood on the courthouse steps. Louise was healthy now, back to her normal weight, her color good. But she stayed closer to James than she used to, and she still had nightmares sometimes. "Is it really over, Daddy?" she asked. James looked down at his daughter, his living, breathing, beautiful daughter who had been smart enough and brave enough to leave him clues that saved her life. "Yeah, sweetheart, it's really over." They drove home to their new house, a small place James had bought with his own money after refusing to touch a penny of the insurance payout. Louise had decorated her new room with drawings of horses and pictures of the two of them together. That night, as James tucked Louise into bed, she handed him a card she'd made at school. "What's this for?" he asked. "Just because." James opened the card. Inside, Louise had drawn a picture of him wearing armor, holding a sword. At the bottom, in her careful handwriting, she'd written, "You didn't just save me, Daddy. You saw what no one else could." James felt tears sting his eyes. "I love you, Louise." "I love you too, Daddy." James kissed her forehead and turned off the light. In the hallway, he passed a framed photo. May had given him a picture of him and Louise at her 10th birthday party, both of them laughing at something off camera. Louise had almost died because of the woman who was supposed to protect her. But she'd survived because she'd been smart enough to leave clues and brave enough to trust that her father would find them. James would never forgive Florence for what she tried to do. He would never forgive Sheriff Merritt for looking the other way. He would never forgive anyone who had put his daughter in danger. But he would spend the rest of his life making sure Louise knew she was safe, loved, and protected. In the living room, James turned on the television just in time to catch a news report about Florence's sentencing. The reporter called it one of the most shocking cases of attempted familicide in Montana history. James turned off the TV and locked the front door. Tomorrow, he would take Louise to school, work on a truck engine at the shop, help her with her homework. Normal life. The life Florence had tried to destroy. But tonight, he walked through his house one more time, checking windows and doors, making sure everything was secure. He'd lost everything once almost. And he would never let it happen again.